Hello everyone. Well, I'll do something a little bit different. Witness True Sorcery, a recent contributor to the channel, recently put out a video. It's the very same day that I did my tradition and destruction video. So he went out to the woods and he had some thoughts about not only nature and progress, very similar to my ideas, but he was also interested in cars, the problems with machinery. Essentially, I'm driving at the moment so that I can have my thoughts be as clear as possible, so I can be immersed in the subject. Borislav, Witness True Sorcery, said that he's anxious about driving. He doesn't drive himself. He has negative feelings towards machinery, industry, and this very much relates to what I said in terms of human progress and civilization. So he said that he doesn't drive because he doesn't really like the commercial aspect of driving. And I certainly agree with that. I don't really, in terms of vehicles in general, I've never really thought of myself as being interested in cars or anything similar to that. He said that he doesn't like how cars are an extension of the ego, and I completely understand that. I think what I really wanted to say is that for me, I've always been I've had an aversion to noise and speed and movement. I write a lot about this. In fact, one of my very early stories when I was submitting to magazines was a story called The Fall of Ostelgren, which was kind of a fantastical story, slightly gothic as well, about a dreamer figure, one of the Welkin race, who lives in the clouds. He falls to earth and has to get back home by climbing a skyscraper. I'm not a fan of bustling cities or just light, speed and noise in general. It's not really I'm not sure if it's something to do with overload. But I just don't feel like I don't really feel like I am myself when I'm in these sorts of situations. I think there's definitely a contrast. It almost reminds me of the story, The History of Photogen and Nycteris, by George MacDonald, a wonderful story, and I highly recommend it. That story relates to the contrast, kind of dichotomy between a boy and a young girl. It's essentially, they both have different characteristics. The boy is of the sun and the girl is of the night. And I think there are certain people that are more attuned to the quiet in the dark and the cerebral and the calm. I think a good example of that will be Alan Lee, who I mentioned, who was the subject of my last review, Alan Lee's Lord of the Rings sketchbook. So for me, that's really what I think about in terms of machinery. I was in an accident in 2018, I believe it was, so that has made me somewhat anxious about driving, although as you can tell, I don't have too much of a problem driving when I'm going to places that I know. Also, of course, there are, and as Borislav mentioned, there are ecological problems to do with machinery and whatnot. I think I primarily think of issues to do with driving from a kind of an ecological perspective, since that's my background, especially in relation to fragmentation, habitat fragmentation, that is, roadkill and whatnot. Especially frustrates me whenever I see a dead badger on the road or a dead deer. It is, of course, a little bit harsh to say, but there are benefits, in a sense, to this profusion of cars and machinery. Obviously, road traffic accidents are not great at all, but they do cull deer numbers, and for those that are not aware, deer are in fact a cause of a variety of ecological problems. Also, they happen to be a kind of a profusion of roadkill is also useful for sylphidae, which are carrion beetles, which I studied on my dissertation. So we're nearly at the woodland here. But as I say, I do have somewhat of a tenuous relationship with driving and just machinery in general. Especially after that accident, I didn't really step into the car for several months, and I do admittedly still feel quite anxious as well, even when I've gained more experience. The funny thing is that I used to be an ecologist, a consultant, and that required a lot of driving, sometimes up to 3 hours just to get to a site, do a bat survey or a phase 1 habitat survey, and then go back 3-hour return journey. So we are here at the nature reserve. Let's park up. So we're here at the nature reserve. I'll probably go for a little bit of a walk, stretch my legs, and see if we can't think more about these issues of ecology, machinery, cars, light, speed and noise, and things like this. So I think it's a good illustration of this contrast between machinery and vehicles and light, speed and noise and movement. Because whilst I did enjoy that drive somewhat, there's also, I'm keenly aware that there's like a disparity between, it's kind of a means to an end really, being in a car, whereas this is the prize, as it were, walking in a nice stable, quiet woodland, very cool, very fresh. And it reminds me of a feeling I had when the last time I went on a plane. I admittedly do have rather a fear of planes, for similar reasons as to my anxiety relating to cars. I remember desperately wanting my arrival and return journeys from Rome to end. I could not wait to get on firm ground again. I remember looking at a photo on my phone of a painting that I took in Rome. It was the School of Athens at the Vatican Museums. And I remember endowing all the different characters in that painting with a kind of a story, kind of made up a grand kind of narrative for the 2-hour journey, the 2-hour return journey. And I remember when that plane landed, all of my muscles were just extremely sore and tense. And it was the greatest feeling to land. So I remember writing a short story around this time, in fact. It was about an old man who shuffled into a cubicle. It's one of the very first sci-fi stories I wrote, in fact. So he shuffled into this cubicle, and we hear all these buzzings and beepings, and it's almost like a tin can that's rattling. And it's the message of that story was kind of as a way of getting all of the anxiety of technology out of a person, particularly an older, quieter person. Kind of like a cathartic release, I think. I've also written stories about planes as well, as you can imagine. There's a great novel by Shirley Jackson called We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and that story features a character called Merricat Blackwood, and she, at the very beginning, talks about how she would rather walk among the clouds, and in fact that was rather than walk through a busy, bustling town. And in fact that was one of the inspirations for my story, The Fall of Ostelgren. So again, just to bring the point home, I think for me, my relationship with machinery just comes more from that kind of a psychological aspect. Although it does, of course, I am sympathetic to the ecological, environmental concerns as well. So there are certain moments in life where it feels like things just connect. And I was walking to a certain point that I always come to. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see it on camera, but I'm essentially on a hilltop right now. And I'm greeted by some cattle grazing. You don't usually see them. I don't usually see them, despite the fact that I've been here many, many times. So let's see how the view is. I almost think of it as two different voices. The voice of the earth and the voice of man. And obviously the voice of the earth, fire, the crackling of fire, the tweeting of birds, the roar of rotting deer. Voice of man being machinery, of course, of culture and political debate, philosophical debate. But I think it's that synthesis. If everything went quiet and humankind disappeared, there would be no appreciating nature. We are sort of the eyes of the world, aren't we? We are the eyes of the world. Indeed, there's a plane going overhead right now. Noise. I'm not sure it's a case of one voice drowning out another voice, the louder voice, the voice of man drowning out the voice of nature, the quieter voice. I think they need to speak in unison, just in the same way of art and architecture, combining with technology, so retaining the natural, the mythic and the archetypal on our spacecraft and on our buildings and whatnot as we proliferate into the cosmos.